So we're going to start by going to the plugin menu. Then you have your Turbulence FD submenu here. So if I just click here so that I can try to open this. So we'll just quickly look at basic things here. So now, anytime you want to start your Turbulence FD simulation, the first thing you need to do is for you to bring up your container. So if I click on the container, it's going to load up this. So what this container is this is more like the area of simulation. Anything that is within this box will be simulated, will have the fluid simulation, but anything that goes out of this, there won't be any calculation for it. So that's why you need to always make sure you start with your container. So if you have, now that I have this container, let's look at the basic settings here. So you have your container menu, you have your simulation, viewport, rendering, and so on and so forth. So don't be intimidated by these so many categories there or sub options there. You just really need those things that you need. All right, so don't just get yourself worked out with that. So let's look at container. So the container, the first option under the resolution, you have your voxel size. So the voxel size is more like the resolution of your simulation. Basically, that is what it is. So the way it works is more like the volume builder in Cinema 4D. So the higher the value, what you are doing is that you are increasing the voxel size. It's more like your pixel. So when the pixel is large, that means the resolution is not much. So you're having a lower resolution. It's just more like an inverse movement. So if you want to have a high resolution, what you need to do is to reduce this voxel size. So it's more, okay, so let me quickly explain with this. So it's more like, let's say for instance, you have this. If you are having a voxel size of this, making your object, then you want to create, for instance, let's say for instance, I want to create an eye. I want to create an eye. So I'm using this voxel size to create the eye. I'm going to have less resolution because this will, at the point where I have a curve, for instance, the voxel size will not really give me that information compared to when you have a smaller voxel size. So when you have a smaller voxel size, you have more resolution to your object, so you have smaller size to give you that. So that's just basically what it is. So the lower the value, the higher the resolution. Then the grid size. So the grid size is, you will not really see this. Okay, so the grid size is more like this box now. So really, so that's what it is, this box. So if I come to the box, you notice you have your X, Y, and Z. So the X is this size. So if I want to increase the size to to twice this size, all I just need to do is make this 200. You notice what happens. So it increases this. And also, as you're changing this value, always look at a tip here. You're going to be getting a feedback of what information or what file size is going to produce. All right, so it's giving you this guy here, and it's telling you, it's proposing that, okay, at the end of the whole thing, if you use Opres, you're going to be having 1.2 gigabyte file size, and if you're using your CPU to simulate, you're going to be having 153.1 megabytes and so on, then your GPU and so on and so forth. So changing this value will affect information you have here. So if I bring this down, so let's say for instance I'm making it 50, notice what happens. Your CPU jumps to 42 point something, so it reduces. So based on this voxel size and your grid size, it does the calculation by itself, so it works. So let's bring this back to 100. So even if I change this, you won't really see the information here. So I'm going to come back here. Then you have your cache. So what the cache does is more like, this is where you save your cached information. Anytime you want to cache anything, you save them here. And by the time I'm going to talk more about this, you're going to see how to use that. Then you have what you want to cache. So by default, temperature is checked on for you to cache. So if you want to cache your velocity and collision, you also have them here to cache. Then under your simulation, this is where you do your settings for whatever you want to simulate. All right. So you have a solver. which all these things gave you a resolution to this. But by the time I start adding objects, you start understanding that. So what I want to talk about now is going under your viewport. You notice your show grid, very important. I'm going to come back in. So if you go to your show grid, it's going to show you the grid of this voxel. So this, you can notice this pattern. This is more like the size of that voxel that we were talking about. So if you come to container, if I increase this to, let's say, 5, you notice what happens to this. This does not in any way increases the box itself. It only increases the checkerboard inside the box, so making you have a particular resolution value. So if I bring this to 10, you notice what happens. Okay, your grid size still remains 100. So if I bring this back to 1, see what happens. So these tend to have more resolution. So if I can move further and say maybe I want to go 0.5, and that also reduces that and gives you a higher resolution. Okay, so I'm going to take this back to 1. That is what that does. So for you to do your simulation, there are things you need to put in consideration, and that is, you need to have an object, a source object, to simulate your fluid from. So any object works. So if I bring in a sphere, for instance, notice this sphere is larger than this. You can just reduce this such that the sphere is within the box. All right, so I can just get rid of this. So the bounding box, you can also decide to hide that and bring it back. So now that you have this, now you have your simulation window, which is what you use to start your simulation. You don't use this play button, you use the simulation window. So if I click on simulation window, this comes up here. So all I just need to do is to start, but we have different mode of simulation. You can have your cache simulation, interactive, and up-res. So cache simulation will make use of this. It's going to save your cached file here so that you can play back. Then interactive doesn't save anything, it just simulates while you are working in the viewport. So, but I tend to use cache because anytime I need to go back and compare, I can always go back. Then you have your up-res. I don't advise you using this if you don't really have a high-end system. Then you can also use a workspace, what you want to simulate with. Either you want to use your Intel, your system's Intel processor, or you want to use a GPU. So you can choose any of these to simulate with. All right. So right now, if I click on start, nothing will happen. Now you notice because I chose cached, I now have cache here. So that means it has cached the simulation and saved it for me. So anytime I come back and play, it's going to play from this cache. And now notice I've clicked on start, I've cached that, but I'm not seeing anything. The reason why I'm not seeing anything is because this source object, even though it's within this confine of this box, I need to still add one more tag to this source object. So if I select this sphere and I hit Shift C to bring up this commander, I can just type Turbulence FD emitter, or you could just right click on it here, you go to Turbulence FD tag, you see Turbulence FD emitter. So it's going to add that tag to this. So if you notice for this tag, you have emitter active, you have your collision object. So because I've already added this, that means automatically it turns this object to emitter. Then you can add your radius to it. So let's see. If I play this now, or I cache this again, and let's see what we're going to do. So it's telling me whether it's going to override the cache that you can just override. So we'll do that. So let's try and play. See, nothing still happens. And the reason why nothing happens is because I need to do one more thing in this tag. And that is what I want to cache, what I want to simulate. Right now, okay, you know Turbulence FD is used for fluid simulation and smoke, fire, and all that. So I need to tell Turbulence FD what I want to simulate out of all these things here. You have your temperature, density, fuel, burn, and all so on. So basically, the first four is what you want to that has a visual information of fluid that you can do. So I have temperature active here, but under my emitter tag, you notice we have temperature, we have density, we have fuel, and we have burn. But each of them have value of 0. So 0 means off, 1 means on. So really, so if I want to cache the temperature, all I need to do is just go to this and make it 1. And that doesn't mean I can't go beyond that. I can go to 10, I can choose any value, but 1 is okay. So if I make this 1 and I go back to this to cache, override, so you can start seeing, you'll start seeing the fluid simulation here. Okay, so now that this is cached, I can always rewind and play, and you see the simulation in real time. So you can see that. So that's how to activate a particular channel that you want to simulate. All right, so you can always go back and create a new simulation that you want to cache. So if, for instance, I want to create a new one that I want to add, and now I can just go to new simulation and make sure that simulation is selected, then come over here. So let's say I want to include density. So I'll add density. So in this case, I want the density to be much more. So maybe I'll make the density 10, for instance. All right, so that is not enough. I need to go back to my turbulence tag, object rather, go to the container. Sorry, go to the simulate, then make sure you have your density active. Because by default, temperature will be active, but every other channel will not be active. So you have to activate them. So if I activate density, so we're going to work with the default values first and see what happens. So make sure you have this selected, this new cache that I created, and then simulate. So it's going to simulate that. So we have that. So let's see the difference between the first one. So if I go to the first one and play, see what you get to have. And if I go to the next one and play, all right, so we're not seeing this effect right now. The reason is because we need to go to the turbulence of the object and go to the viewport, or the rendering rather. So if you go to the rendering or the viewport, you can decide to say which channel you want to use to display in the viewport. All right, so right now the viewport, what viewport is showing us is temperature channel, but if I render, you are going to see what we have. So if I click on render, you have this. All right, so this is just what you are going to be seeing in the viewport. All right, so if you come to the rendering, you can go to your smoke and activate that. So I'm going to come back to this, but let's just go back and take this a step further. It's possible we might have like 3 different videos explaining this, because I cannot explain everything in one video, and I want to make it as short as possible. So you understand the way this works. You create your new cache that you cache over and all that. Then if I want to do an interactive cache, so I can bring this object, move it down. Now, moving this object down, you will think that this simulation is supposed to come with it. It doesn't, because this was where we simulated from, we cached from. So that's where it's going to start. So for us to start simulating from this place, we need to create a new simulation and simulate. So in this case now, I want to try out the interactive. So if I go to interactive and I play, so it's going to cache that. And the good thing with interactive is that it continues. Then I can move this object. As I'm moving this object, notice what is happening. The fluid is going with it. So if I move this here, it's going to take a little bit of time. The fluid will go with it. All right, so that's what the interactive is used for. It's just for you to quickly see what you are working on, the effect you are going to have. and that doesn't cache anything. You notice here, even though I created a new cache, it will not do anything by the time I stop because this is interactive. All right. So if I stop that, notice I've stopped and this doesn't change. It's still 0 bytes until I change this to cache and cache this before you start seeing this value changing. All right. So that's very important for you to know. So you have that. So let's just wait for it to finish up. Then you're going to have a value. So now if I go back, you can see we now have a value. All right. So that's just to explain to you about that. Then the other thing I would also want to talk about is now going over to the simulation. So first off, let's go to the temperature. So for the temperature, you can decide to deactivate your temperature or activate. So you have that. Then you have your temperature diffusion. So I'm just going to pick those ones that I know of. I'm not really going to talk about things that I don't use. So here I use the cooling. The cooling is more of the rate at which the temperature value cools off. That is what the cooling is. So 2% is too small. So that's why you're seeing that object moving to the top. If we increase this to, let's say, 30 and create a new cache and do that, you notice it cools off fast. It doesn't get to the top because the cooling is now high. So it cools off fast. Do you understand? So you can do that, use it for any effect you so wish to have. So you can see it cools fast. So you can use it to create your flame or anything whatsoever. Maybe you want to create smoke from light to simulate hot tea or stuff like that. So you can do that. Then if we bring this to, let's try 12 or 10 and override that, it's going to cool off faster, not faster actually, a lot slower, but not like this when we started. All right, so you already get the idea, right? So that's what this is. Then we have the buoyancy, which I also make use of. So what the buoyancy is used for is more of the speed of how do I put it? The rate at which the fire burns. So it's more like the velocity, the speed of the burn of the fire or the displacement of that. So if you bring this to, let's say, 2 and create a new cache and simulate. So let's go back and I think this is fine. Right. So 10 is fine. So let's create a new cache. Let's see. So notice we have 2. You can see the rate of displacement is not much. So the reason is because the speed is very low. So it seems like it's burning, dying fast. But if you look at it in the real sense, it's not dying fast. The speed is just what is being slowed down. You can notice the speed of your burn is slowed down. If I want to increase this, I can, let me just create a new one so I can compare. So the default was I think 20. So let's make this, let's double this. Let's make this 40 and cache this. So you will see that this goes faster. The rate of burn on that is a lot faster and it seems like it's getting to the top very fast. So that's what the buoyancy is about. It's more like the speed. For me, that's in my own words, so that's how I see that. So if we play this now, let me get close so you see the rate at which it goes. So we can notice it burns so fast. And if I compare it with this, see, this burns slowly and being compared from this to that. and see the difference. All right, so that is that. Then the next thing we have, so I'm going to bring this back to the default and also bring this back to the default. So I think 10 is fine. So the buoyancy direction is the direction of the burn. So the default is Y. So this is more like X, Y, Z. So I can also permit me to say that I can call buoyancy more like your gravity. So the gravity is more, the higher the value, the higher the gravity and the faster it gets. And the direction of the gravity is this. So because we have a positive one, so it's moving directly here. So let's bring this guy here and come here. So if we bring this to -1, what happens now is that it's going to burn downwards. And you see it start burning down. So depending on whatever effect you actually want, you can choose these values and work with. All right, so you have that. Then you can also add two together. So maybe you want it, as it coming down, you want it to go to the positive positive z. So you can just say 1 and let's cache that. So override, don't worry. So you see it goes. But if I don't want it to go more like at angle 45, I can just reduce this to maybe 0.3. So the rate at which it get deflected to this is a lot slower. All right. So if I start this, see what happens. Still deflected, but the rate is not as when we had one. So it's deflected more down here. Okay. So we have that. But if you make this 0 and also make this 0, and let's see the effect you get to have. You just see this in one spot. Because even though we have this, we are not deflecting towards any direction. Right? So that's very important. So before I move to density, I have two other props that I add to it. I have the turbulence and I have the vorticity. So the turbulence, in my own understanding, is more like the large waves or the large disturbance, the large noise, and the vorticity is this smaller noise. Okay, so that is my own word. So for me to add noise to this, I need to first off add an intensity. So if I make this intensity, so let's say we want to make this intensity 10 to start with. Notice it opens this other field, so you can tell which channel we want to affect. So this turbulence, maybe we want to affect the temperature. We already have temperature. Then the smaller size and the larger size, you can choose that. So the noise that we're looking at, what is the smallest size of the noise you're going to be having? So if we bring this here, if you notice, we have 2 centimeters and we have 2. So if I try and check 2 all through, so the smallest form of noise is going to be this, and the largest form of noise is also going to be this. So let's say I want my largest form of noise to be, let's try 10. This is not so much, so we could just make it 8, and the smallest to be let's say 4, so 8, 4. So I can come here, so I can just delete this. This is just to give me a visual guide. So I'll make this 4 centimeter and make this 8 centimeters. And notice we have not added, so I can just hide this. We've not added any direction, but because we've already added turbulence, it's going to affect this. So if we cache this, see what we're going to have. So it's actually affecting this, but the effect is not intense. The reason why it's not intense is because of this turbulence intensity. So if we bring this to, let's say 40, 45, anyhow. So let's try this and we cache. You notice the rate at which it moves is a lot higher. So you have that. So you can use this to get any effect you want. So maybe you want to create a magic ball or sorcerer, so you can just have that effect. So you have this, okay. So and if you want to add it to, you want to add to it, so maybe we want this to just move up a little bit, so maybe 0.3 or 0. Let's try 0.3 and catch that. So it moves up with that turbulence. See, you have that turbulence to it. So we can also go back to the turbulence and increase this. So let's say 80, and we want the larger one to be 15. So let's try 15 and this. So let's crash. So you can start seeing the turbulence in this here. And notice it starts with that turbulence, and as it moves up, the turbulence gradually dies away. And the reason is because if you come to this, the buoyancy is so high that the speed is killing off the turbulence. So what you can do here, if you want to see more of that as it's moving up, is to reduce this buoyancy. So if I bring the buoyancy to 5, something like that, so it's not too fast, so you are seeing the turbulence more, even though as it's moving up, you're still seeing the turbulence. So you can just use that. So now what I also do is, coupled with this, I also add smaller noise, which is the vorticity. You can see the effect. So if I go to the vorticity, I can also activate that. So you can just, let's start with 1, and also which channel do you want to affect? You want to affect temperature. So let's see what we have. And as we're working, we'll start increasing this. Okay, so you can see a different feel to this. All right, so I'm liking this. So you can already see the effect you get to have there. All right, so if we bring this to 20 and start all over, so let's create so that, so anyways, you can always delete all these things if you don't need them anymore, so you don't add unnecessary cache to your system. So we have this. I'll just create a new one, add that here, and with a new setting. So you notice we have more vorticity here because the vorticity there was high, is high rather. So you have more displaced noise here. So you can use this to create whatsoever effects you want. So you see the possibilities and of creating something wowing, something so that you would not even dream of creating. So if you play this over again, so you can see the effect you get to have. So you have that. So this is so beautiful. All right. So you have that. So the other thing is, so let's now bring this back down and go to our temperature and increase this to, let's say, 10. And then, so let's now say we want to add an object that this will collide with. So maybe we'll have a plank somewhere here. So then just supposedly this is a plank that is hanging somewhere here. And we want this to, want to see the interaction of the fluid with this plank object here. So maybe I will duplicate this, rotate, hold down Control, and then Shift. Can move this here a little bit, so we have that. Okay, so we have that. I just want to create a cross section that this will interact with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of them, right click. It's very important. I'll right click and add the same emitter tag. So you will say, why am I adding the emitter tag? We don't want this to emit, we want them to be collider. Surprise, surprise, the thing is the same tag is what you use for emitter and also for collider. The only thing you just need to do is you would come to this collision object and click here and deactivate them. So you don't really need that. So you just click on this collision object. That's just it. Once you click on collision object and you know that nothing here is active, this becomes a collider object, and then it works. So later we're going to be looking at looking at more things about this collider object here, or the emitter object. So if I cache this now, so let's create a new cache and cache this. Notice, so let's see if it's going to interact with this object. Okay, so you can actually barely see this because this object is thin, so you might not really see this. So I think this is not the right, let me just stop. This is not the right object I should have used. So maybe I would use another sphere, make it large, so something like this, so we can see this object interacting with it. So we just right click, add this and make it a collision object. Then I will delete these ones and let's just simulate this again and see what we get out. Okay, so you can start seeing this interacting with that. So because you have enough volume, so you see that. Then you can also go back. So while this is what you can also go to the tag and add the collision radius. So the collision radius here is so for a more accurate value. So you can just change this depending on whatever you want anyway. So you can just change your collision radius, and that will be the radius of collision. So you can see the way this is affecting this and is colliding, the smoke is colliding with this and is finding its way over to somewhere else. So I'm just going to quickly stop here. I don't want to bug you, so you can just play around with this. And in the next one, I'm going to talk more on this emitter tag, and then talk more about other channels for on this guy. So look more on that. So if I play this now, you notice that you can see the way it's now playing in real time. And mind you, we are still working with fire. This is still fire, and we've not included the smoke. So if we want, we could have just come here, go to the density, make sure the density is included here. So once we have this included, you can come, so it's included. So that's just pretty much what we need, and the density is also active, so you can just work with that. So just fill this. So if I want to change how if I want to see how the density is moving, it's just the same way. You can just go to your simulation, go to the density. Density has its own values also. So the dissipation for the density is more like the cooling. So the dissipation is the rate at which it cools off. So that's what the density is. So what I usually do is I make the buoyancy, I make it cool faster than I make the temperature cool faster than the density. So temperature now in this case is more like the fire for me, and density is more like the smoke. So if I bring this to 12, so that means this cools faster than this. Then the other thing is the gravity. So right now the gravity, we don't have anything here. All right, so sorry, this cooling is what I'm changing now. So the cooling is going to be, let's say 4, and the dissipation It's going to be that. So for this, we can try 15. So remember, this is more like the speed. So if we make this 8, and for the gravity is more like the buoyancy also. So it's more like the speed of the rate at which this goes. So if we make this, let's say 15, and this is moving downward, so this is we're going to have an issue because this is counteracting this one. This is moving up while the density is coming down. We don't want that. We want them to move up at the same direction. So I will just make this 1, or let's just say 0.7. Then we'll change what we want to see. We don't want to see the smoke, we want to see the density. So we'll just come here, density, do the same thing with this density. So by the time I simulate now, what we are going to be seeing is going to be what the density is giving us. So this is the density channel. This is what the density channel is giving us, not the file. Okay, so very important. So you see what we have. So we have more smoke coming out here compared to the fire. So you can just use this to quickly check the effect of each of the channel, what you're going to have, by just displaying what you want to see, and that will give you an effect of. So the smoke is moving around the object more than that of the fire. So let's just wait for this to finish up, then we'll see the render of both the smoke and the fire. Okay, so we're already 40 minutes, so I wasn't even expecting to take this long. So I'm going to stop this here, and then in the next tutorial we're just going to look at something else with turbulence FD. So if you look at this, so we have this now. If you play through, have this here. So if I render, you notice the effects we're going to have. So in the next one, I'm going to talk more about the other things here. So if you feel this was helpful, please do give me a like and a thumbs up because it helps me. And if you are new to this channel, please do subscribe because I do tutorials like this every time. So once more, do have a wonderful day and God bless you. Bye.